specifically, and that tool sort of came under the ownership of Department of Transport. Department of Transport decided that they were going to build essentially a free-to-use open source tool that can replace that functionality, that service that's being provided already, and expand it nationwide. So yeah, that's the sort of background for this tool. It's mainly aimed at local authorities. It's intended to support a fourth data source on BODS. You know, obviously we have timetables, vehicle location, and fares. We're looking at adding disruptions data to that. So like I've said, in the main, that's Sirius X, but in the longer term, that'll also become GTFS RT, specifically service alerts. So yeah, I'll just sort of go through this. I'm on the pre-prod site at the moment, so bear that in mind. And I'm set up as, I don't know if anyone from TFGM is on this call, but I'm actually set up as Transport for Greater Manchester as an organisation. So as you can see, it's the regular kind of government design, white and black, you know, as you would expect to see. So this is a sort of the landing page of the site. This is where you would see a global view of all the sort of public transport disruptions in your area, that you've already set up, ones that are live, ones that are upcoming. And there'll also be a separate tab which will be recently closed as well. There is a further functionality further down, so you can, you know, look at all your disruptions and filter them by whatever kind of field you want to filter them by, you know, once you've started to build up a bit of a backlog. But for now, I'll just walk through actually creating a disruption. So there are two main levels to a disruption. There is the sort of global level of disruption, you know, what is the disruption and when's it active, and then there is what we call the consequences, which is how that impacts the public transport network. So most of these fields are defined by the data standard Sirius X. So really you're just sort of inputting fields, so you know these things should be fairly intuitive and self-explanatory. Type of disruption, planned or unplanned. So let's say we've got some roadworks happening. We might put some summary roadworks on whatever street. Put some advice on, and then you can add links back to your own information services if that's what you choose. A number of reasons for the disruptions. So these are all fixed in the schema. I mean, this list should cover everything that you would expect to see, but if not, you know, we can always look at adding further ones in. But for now, we'll say roadworks, and then we've got two date ranges. One is the disruption, what we call the validity period, and then the publication window as well. So often these will be the same thing, particularly if you're finding out about a disruption in retrospect. But of course, if you know about things in advance, you know, perhaps it's roadworks that you've got notification of long in advance, or some sort of regular event like a market or a marathon or whatever, you may actually want to separate these dates. You know, there will obviously always be a date of when the disruption is active, when it's affecting public transport, but the publication window is essentially communicating to downstream consumers of the data when you want this actually advertised. So you may have an annual event, say for like a marathon. You might have that in your system all year round, but you only want it publicising a month or two before, so you don't want to be publishing a marathon night before it happens. So you can sort of configure that to make it a little more detailed for the people consuming the data. Just stick it all as the same for now, because it's just easier that way. There's various ways you can configure these things, add daily or weekly repetitions, or add bespoke sort of additional validity periods, because obviously you may have scenarios where roadworks are only active overnight, you know, between the hours of midnight and 6 in the morning or something, if it's, you know, high priority work. So that allows you to sort of just add a bit of extra detail in. Once you've defined the disruption, then you start to think about how it actually affects the public transport network. So there's sort of 4 main levels of consequence. You can have as many consequences as you like. So that's something that's really I encourage people to think about when they're creating a disruption. We'll go on the simple one for now. We'll just say operator wide. So at this point, you've got a choice of what mode your operator is. Operators impacted, so that these should be operators in your area. What you'll find is that at the moment it's operators in your area plus all ferry and tram operators, because we've not narrowed them down in the system geographically just yet. That feature's upcoming. So what I should say here is operators, bus operators that operate in the northwest. In Greater Manchester, but then ferry and tram across the whole country. So you see Blackpool Transport because they've got a tram network. But let's just imagine that I'm seeing the ones that are in my area. So I might say River Northwest. For this scenario, it could be anything. Company stop trading or whatever. What that does. You get removed from journey planners. I hope no one from Meridian on the call. This is not meant to be presaging some doom of your company. Just show an example of what you might do for disruption. If you are in a scenario where an operator suddenly ceased trading and the services need to be removed, at short notice, you would just define it as, the operator removed from journey planners. Yes, this is the most powerful, essentially, part of the disruptions service. Because when the data is consumed downstream, the idea is that this binary choice, no would just mean that this information we're providing for the consequence is meant to be added to what you have. But if it's saying yes, remove from journey planners, it's saying remove this operator completely from your journey plan downstream. So that'd be one type of consequence you can add to a disruption. We'll go into something a bit more detail. We'll go into the stops level one. So the stops and service type consequences are a map. The service itself accesses both BODS and TNDS data to present data in your region. So as I'm TFGM, I will only be able to select stops in the geography that I've been allotted, so the ACO area that is Greater Manchester. But there's various different ways you can do it. You can type in stops into the search bar if you want, do it that way, or you can type in another word. I know this is Manchester, or alternatively, you can actually go into the map function and start to draw polygons on the map. And what that'll do is pull up all the stops in that area. So let's say you've got some stops here. It's got the name and the bearing and the ACO code of the stop once you've selected them. So you can do that. What this is aimed at is you've got multiple levels the way you can do things. If you are familiar with which stop is being impacted by disruption, you can obviously type it in and find it, and it'll give you the stops in your area. But alternatively, if you're not familiar with the geography of your area, you can just draw a polygon on the street or area that's affected, and it'll pull up all the stops in that area, allowing you to add it manually. And as well as the sort of stop and service data, so obviously the stops come from NAPTAN. The service data can come from BODS or TNDS, depending on what you choose. That is actually in the power of the user to choose what your source data is. But you can also source geographically, because as you can see, we're using Mapbox as the mapping function. So the map can pop out if you've got any issues, with the sort of visibility of it. It still functions fully on the pop out. But what you can do is search locally. So you could even say, search for geographic points of interest. Old Trafford Football Stadium, Mamblesby Way, and take straight there. And I could draw a polygon around this and start to add stops around the area that I've zoomed into. But for now, for the purpose of this thing, I'll just select all the stops that are in that geography. It's quite a lot of stops. Let's just imagine that these stops are actually all on the same street, but it's being closed. It's closed. Services 1 and 2 directed whatever. And what you can do at this point is if this road is completely closed, again, you can just remove from your journey planners. So that will be saying to anyone downstream consuming this data, that these stops are inaccessible, remove them. So any sort of dynamic journey planning doesn't allow you to plot any departures from those stops, and instead the algorithm will send you to the nearest stop, which is still active for a journey plan. So that's a stop level type of consequence. I'll just quickly show some of the functionality on the services one as well. So there's services one, which looks very similar, but this is as stops and services. So you've got all the services in your area. See, these are all Greater Manchester services. So, you know, if I pick one, Wigan, Tynefield, Grange, that'll pop up on the map, all the stops that are attached to that service. This is still a work in progress, the line of route thing, but that'll be improved in the next few weeks. So you can just go through and add, you know, specific stops to a service. So that would limit the nature of this consequence to only that stop, only that service at these stops. So that's a way of sort of creating something a little more granular. Obviously, the stop level consequence affects all services that stop at that stop, whereas using the services one, you can create more granular ones, which are obviously you know, a specific service at stop, or you can then if you're looking for advisory notes, you could just add all stops for that service if you wanted to, and then put a consequence, you know, this is an advisory note, you know, closed stops X and Y not in use. So what you could say here is say that no from journey planners. So that scenario could be for, you know, if I create a consequence that closes the stops on the road that I've defined in a previous consequence, I can then add a note to this service and say all of these two specific stops are closed, which are defined in the separate consequence. This one is just an advisory note. I'm saying don't remove from journey planners. This would appear on the entire service for those stops. So it's a way of warning passengers that aren't specifically looking at those stops are inaccessible. And obviously you can change direction and a few other features as well. So I'm not sure what's happening there. There's the risk of using test servers. So if I've created my consequences and I'm happy with them, obviously you can review them. At that point, you can either add a social media post to it. So this is a bit of functionality that we have. It's not actually active on the pre-prod site at the moment. It's on the test server. But what this allows you to do is plug in, if you have Hootsuite or something like that, you can plug in Hootsuite and then push out the same information that's contained in these consequences out to your social media channels. And when I say social media channels, I mean Twitter and Facebook, essentially. To sort of, you know, streamline any process that you've got for pushing out disruptions data, and then you just publish the disruption, and then it appears in your live disruptions there. And then you can go into it again. You know, once it's active, you can add and remove things or delete it and edit it completely. And also there's disruption history, so you can go in and you've got an audit trail of who's changed and updated this disruption. So that's the sort of basics of the service in terms of creating a disruption. I'll just talk about some of the sort of management functions we have. So for different user account levels, there is the regular publisher level account. So what that means is that you've got the rights in your area to create a disruption and publish it and it go out through the API. But we have a lower level account, which is called staff account, which is basically for the power to create a disruption but not actually publish it. That goes for approval to a publisher level. So the idea behind that is that if you have operators in your area, you know, you can onboard them as well to support your disruptions data creation, but also give you final authority over what gets published and what doesn't get published. And then higher than that is the management level account, which I have, the admin account. So you'll see I have the ability to add and remove users in my account. And so basically it's intended to be self-service ultimately, that, you know, a local authority, once they have an admin level account for this, can add as many users as they want in their own area within their own organization, or along, you know, if there are any local agreements that bus operators help supply data, then you can actually onboard bus operators yourself. That's entirely in your control. A bus operator can't get the rights to create disruptions data in your area without the local authority granting it first. And as you see, it's geographically defined. So these admin areas are essentially NAPTAN and admin areas, we've taken from NPTG. So, you know, what that means is that if you're an organisation that has responsibility for multiple areas, so for example, there are local agreements perhaps where Essex do things for Thurrock or Southend, or maybe Lancashire does something for Blackburn and Darwen. You can have as many areas under your sort of your local authority organisation as you need. So yeah, I mean, it's designed to be as self-service as possible, so you can connect your own Hootsuite accounts. Should you want to push these disruptions out as data as well as social media channels. I mean, I'll just go on the test site. Now, this one might not necessarily be stable because there may be deployments going on, but I just want to sort of show the social media functionality a bit more. As you can see, the difference between the pre-prod site and the disruption site, we have an extra tab that's in test at the moment for recently closed. So you can sort of keep an eye on what's happening in your area a bit better, but also the social media function. I can go in and add a social media post. So this might take a little while to look at this test, but yeah, this is the social media page. So you can copy the, you can, because I put test as the word in the description, so you can copy that. You can add an image file should you want to add a graphic to it. Set a date for when you want the social media post to go out, and then pick your social media account. You've got your Hootsuite account set up there, and then you can set which. So if you've got multiple Twitters, because obviously some big organisations have multiple Twitter feeds, some have multiple Facebook, so you can do it that way. And then just as a little last one, I'll just show, for the purposes of the demo, the data that comes out the back end. So this is the API for the pre-prod site. So at the moment, it's a fairly basic API. It just grabs all the data of all the disruptions that have been defined in the country. It's one big kind of data dump. In the next few months, this service will be plugged directly into BODS. So, you'll be able to go onto BODS, and when you see these three data sources of timetables, locations, and pairs, there will be a disruptions source as well. So when you actually define disruptions in this service, it gets pushed straight out to BODS, and anyone who's using BODS has immediate access to it. You're talking about just, less than 60 seconds between you inputting and publishing and that appearing in this API. So yeah, I'll stop talking now. Conscious that I've been talking for quite a long time. Are there any questions so far about anything I just said? Well, I'll take that as a no then.
Looks like a comprehensive tutorial. Thank you for that.
Yeah, all I'd say is that if any local authorities watching this who haven't already spoken to me about using this service, or have any interest in using this service, then please get in touch. Oh, I've just seen a hand up from Ian Barrett. Ian, it's been a while. Hi, Ian.
Yeah, it's quite a while, isn't it? Two quick queries then. So you're saying it links directly to journey planners and it removes the potential service operator out of the journey plan. How quickly does that do that? I'm just thinking, you don't want to necessarily remove a whole service, depending on what goes on. If there's some other data to go into the journey planners and it's a day of processing for sort of travel line, if you will, how does that work?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'll say that it's the same as any open data source. You can't really govern how data consumers are using it and how actively they are using it. Given that, the time between pressing publish and it appearing in the API is the matter of a few seconds, and the fact that the data packets are very small in terms of SiriusX, there's no reason why that couldn't be done in a few minutes. But of course, it will depend on the business case that the data consumer has, why they're using it. They could be using it to power a journey planning API, in which scenario you would expect them to be polling that service every few minutes, and then in the end we've got a subscription service. We'll be pushing it out to them, by sort of heartbeat regularity that they themselves will define. So it's an open-ended question. What I say is, if the data consumer is serious, they can take it as often as they want, every 30 seconds, every minute. But of course, we can't force any data consumer to update in any kind of regularity, any more than we can force them to update the timetable data they consume from BODS.
Which nicely goes on to, because you can't force, like that term, is this is aimed at local authorities. So it's not within the Act or anything like that. So
No.
as this is a voluntary basis that this gets completed, and you're not going to get harassed if you don't do as many, because if you work in a local authority as a shire, there are shed loads of roadworks going on all the time that you don't know about, and bus stops being shut down. So I'm just a bit, this could be a whole team job, let alone an individual.
It is purely voluntary. I mean, really, the service was pitched immediately at, you know, providing a like-for-like replacement to the existing service that the Northern City authorities use, the Northern Combined Authorities. So obviously, it is purely voluntary. It's the first time that BODS has tried to sort of get any data on that's not, you know, legal obligation, I guess. So yeah, it will be on a voluntary basis. There is no pressure to use it, though. Of course, the more people that use it, the better, because it's a virtuous circle. The more people that use it, the more valuable the data is. Therefore, the more people will consume it, thus increasing its value to the local authorities. So yeah, hopefully, yeah, I think we've had conversations with, you know, 10 to 15 local authorities. Most of them seem like they will be using it. That covers quite a lot of the sort of more densely populated areas. But yeah, I mean, I'm keen to get as many people on board as possible.
Okay, thanks.
Some words in the chat. Buying from data consumers. So there are already users of the disruptions service that already exists. So those users will be migrated over. So by which we're talking about Citymapper, we're talking about Move It, bustimes.org. But I think, you know, one of the most important things, and one thing that I think is really positive, is that a lot of local authorities are themselves consuming it. They're using it to actually power their own systems. So, for example, you know, Transport for Greater Manchester will be integrating the data that comes out of this API into their B network information systems that they're building for their franchising rollout. And obviously, South Yorkshire currently use the disruptions data from the existing service. So I think those, you know, that functionality will be migrated over to this service. So it's not just about third-party data consumers. I think it's also that local authorities themselves can actually integrate this into their own information systems and supply themselves, and, you know, essentially supply themselves and third parties using the same service. I've got one more question from David Lehman. When the disruption service goes live, the data will be filtered whatever. Yes, in the short term, we're going to add the originating LTA of the disruption will be in the feed itself. But once the APIs are actually built on BODS, you will be able to filter by operator or local authority, essentially, because I think one of the issues with the existing service is that it doesn't allow you to filter when the data by the sort of creator of the data, which obviously leads to a problem that if you create any kind of large disruption, like a network level, node level, so a bus, you're saying all buses are affected. Currently, the feed, what that means in the feed is that it's affecting all buses in the country rather than the buses in that specific area that the person's created the notification for. So yeah, we have by the end of the next sprint, we will have something in the data stream itself which allows consumers to identify the creator. But in the longer term, yeah, the APIs themselves on the front end of BODS will filter for us. And then one question from Michael.
We've been told throughout this that the operator is responsible for their data on BODS. Looking at this, it looks like you've got the ability to actually remove some of that data. Now, how's that sit?
Well, what I'll say is that this disruptions data does not in any way affect the data that's published on BODS. It relates to the data on BODS and is meant to overlay it should the consumer decide to use it, but it doesn't affect anything that's actually on BODS and published as live and operational. So there will be SiriusX coming out of this API, which will sit alongside the Siri VM. You know, obviously in an ideal scenario, there won't be any conflict between the two, but the SiriusX is meant to be an overlay for the VM and the timetables rather than you know, manipulated directly at source. You know, I think when we start to do a GTFS feed, which incorporates both the vehicle location and then the service level alerts, then you start seeing the same feed. But again, it shouldn't. It won't remove anything from the live things that the operators themselves have published.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll just wrap up by saying, yeah, if anybody who's seen this is interested in having a go on service testing it, please fire me an email over, and I'll get you set up for your area. And then, you know, that doesn't come with any obligation to actually use it, just to see if it, you know, meets your needs or it's something that you might be able to use in future. At the moment, as you've seen, you know, the site is still on a sort of a bespoke URL. We hope to get our gov.uk domain this month and then officially go live with it before the end of the month. And then, yeah, anyone can use it and the data will soon start to appear on BODS. So yeah, that's it from me, Spencer.
Thanks for that, Steve.